Hey there, friend. I want to start by saying thank you for clicking on this video. It really means a lot. And if you feel like subscribing, that would truly be incredible. All right, let's jump into it. My name's Brandon, and this story takes place several years ago, back when I truly thought I had met my forever person. Her name was Lydia. To me, she was everything. Smart, witty, stunning, and we hit it off from the beginning. I can't pinpoint the exact moment things began to shift, but I remember it started when she casually began mentioning a guy she'd gotten to know at her gym. His name was Danny. At the beginning, it seemed completely harmless. Lydia said he had just moved to the area and had helped her out with something, though I can't even remember the details anymore. It didn't seem important, so I let it go. At first, I assumed Danny was just another gym buddy, but over time, I noticed his name started showing up in our conversations more and more. It started off subtly. She'd mentioned that Danny had recommended a new restaurant or talked about a scenic trail outside the city he thought we should check out. Then it shifted into, Danny showed me a cool new workout for shoulders, or Danny had a funny take on the gym's towel policy. I wasn't intentionally keeping track, but before long I realized his name was coming up multiple times a week. 3, maybe 4. And that struck me. For someone who was supposedly just a casual friend, Danny seemed to be taking up an awful lot of space in our conversations, and in Lydia's head. The moment it really sunk in for me happened at a dinner date. We were at one of our favorite Italian spots, just settling into the evening, when I realized she'd already mentioned Danny several times. I put my fork down, took a breath, and decided it was time to say something. I brought it up as gently as I could, telling her I was starting to feel uncomfortable with how often Danny came up. I told her it felt like he was slowly becoming more central in her life, and that was starting to wear on me. She laughed it off immediately, like I'd said something ridiculous. She told me I was being dramatic, that Danny was just a friend, and that I was making a mountain out of a molehill. She kept scrolling on her phone while she said it, not even really looking at me. I tried to clarify. I wasn't trying to be possessive. I just wanted to feel like my concerns mattered. I told her that when someone you love tells you they're feeling uneasy, the last thing you should do is laugh in their face. Finally, she looked up, gave me a smirk that felt more dismissive than kind, called me insecure, and changed the subject. And I let her. That should have been the moment I stood my ground. But I didn't. I backed down. And things only went downhill from there. Danny didn't disappear. If anything, his presence seemed to grow. They lived in the same neighborhood, while I was a solid half-hour away. Lydia didn't bring him up as much anymore, but I knew they were still texting regularly. Despite all of that, I made the decision to propose. I thought that maybe, by getting engaged, Lydia would reorient her focus, choose our future together, and start setting clearer boundaries with other guys like Danny. I bought the ring and, with the help of some of her close friends, pulled off a surprise proposal. She was thrilled. She said yes. A few days later, we were relaxing at my place. Things were calm. I figured it was the right time to have a more serious talk. Since we were planning to get married, I told her I hoped she'd drawn some firmer lines when it came to male friendships, especially with Danny. She chuckled again and told me not to worry, that she wasn't really talking to any of them like that anymore. But when I asked about Danny specifically, she explained that he had just gotten out of a relationship and needed someone to talk to. That's why she was still in touch with him. I suggested, half joking, half serious, that maybe he should consider seeing a therapist instead. She laughed again and told me I was being jealous. I let it slide. But deep down, what really got to me was how she always waved off my concerns as if they were petty or immature. As we started diving into wedding plans, it got harder and harder to ignore what was happening. I could feel it. Lydia wasn't fully invested. There was an emotional thread connecting her to someone else. And whenever I tried to talk about it, she'd flip it back on me, like I was the problem. Then came an afternoon in early October. We had just locked in our wedding date and were making lists of vendors and venues, just enjoying a slow, easy Saturday. It was one of those quiet days where you just lounge around and enjoy being together. We'd ordered our favorite takeout from a spot on 5th Street and were watching an action movie I'd seen a dozen times before but didn't mind seeing again. Around 2:15 in the afternoon, she got up to use the bathroom. I was reaching for another spring roll when someone knocked on the door. I paused the movie and got up, thinking maybe it was her neighbor Betty. She was always coming by asking for sugar or borrowing paper towels. Lydia lived on the 3rd floor of a brownstone, and Betty was no stranger. But it wasn't Betty at the door. It was Danny. Even though we'd never officially met, I knew right away it was him. He stood there holding a small potted plant, something leafy, green, and completely unnecessary. The moment he saw me, his face registered pure shock. He froze for a second, then quickly forced a polite smile. He said he'd heard Lydia hadn't been feeling well and brought the plant to cheer her up. He claimed he wasn't planning to stay, just wanted to drop it off and make sure she was okay. Here's what caught me off guard. Lydia hadn't said anything about being sick. We'd spent the previous night together and she'd seemed totally fine. If she wasn't feeling well, she certainly hadn't told me. I told him she was doing much better now, and thanks for stopping by. I stood there while he hesitated, unsure if he should try to come in or just hand over the plant and leave. He ended up choosing the smarter option. I stayed at the doorway and watched him disappear down the hallway. And then it hit me. Danny didn't stumble upon her apartment. He knew exactly where she lived, which floor, which door. His confident knock, the way he stood there. None of it suggested this was his first time. This was someone who'd been there before, multiple times. When I shut the door and turned back around, Lydia was stepping out of the bathroom, fingers running through her hair like nothing had happened. She asked, completely casually, who had been at the door. I told her it was Danny. Her reaction told me everything. There wasn't even the slightest hint of surprise on her face. She didn't question why I was standing at her door, nor did she act surprised that I'd figured out where she lived. She just gave a small nod and calmly asked what I needed. That's when I finally asked the question that had been pressing on me since I stepped inside. How long has Danny been coming to your apartment? She gave me that same nonchalant laugh I'd come to associate with his name, a sound that always dismissed my concerns. Again, she brushed it off, claiming it was nothing serious, like I was overreacting to something harmless. But I wasn't willing to accept that anymore. I was tired of being made to feel like a paranoid boyfriend, like someone too immature to understand platonic friendships. But this situation had crossed a line long ago, especially once Danny started showing up unannounced at her place. I looked at her, then glanced at the plant on the counter, the one he had brought her, and I thought of all the times I had expressed my discomfort. Each time she had told me I was imagining things. That evening I reached my limit. I told her, without room for negotiation, that she needed to call Danny right then and tell him he wasn't welcome anymore. Not just that, she had to end whatever relationship had developed beyond innocent conversation at the gym. I wasn't making a request. I was giving an ultimatum. She smiled faintly, as if I were being theatrical. Once again, she claimed he was just a friend. The same explanation I'd heard so many times it had lost all meaning. But this time I didn't back down. I glanced at the microwave clock, 2:47 p.m. I told her she had 5 minutes to make the call. If she didn't, I would leave and not come back. And I meant every word. Something in my tone must have struck a chord because, for a brief second, her expression shifted. But then she shook her head and sank into the couch like she still believed I was bluffing. She assumed, like she always had, that I'd cave, that I'd let it slide, that she could charm or dismiss her way out of this too. I watched the minutes pass. 2:48, then 2:49. She didn't move. She sat there casually flipping through her phone like the conversation meant nothing. At 2:50, I started putting on my jacket. At 2:51, she looked up and asked if I was seriously going to walk out. At 2:52, without saying a word, I took my keys off her counter and headed for the door. That's when she finally seemed to realize I wasn't bluffing. She jumped up and followed me out, her voice rising behind me, now tinged with panic. She kept asking if I was really going to end things over this, if I was truly that insecure. I didn't respond. I kept walking down the stairs as her voice echoed behind me, floor after floor. By the time I reached the ground level, she'd stopped following, though I could still hear her calling from above. I got in my car and drove off, my thoughts spinning. I had laid down a clear boundary, given her a straightforward choice, and she hadn't taken it seriously. Even when I made it plain and simple, she treated my request like it was just more emotional noise. That night, around 7:30, she texted me for the first time. She said she wanted to talk. I looked at the message, sat with it for a moment, then put my phone down. I had already said everything that needed to be said. I let the silence speak. There were no follow-up calls, no second message. I went about my week, and by the time Friday came around, something became crystal clear. Lydia wasn't trying to fight for our relationship. She didn't reach out again. She didn't apologize. She didn't try to mend what had been broken. More than a week went by with no contact at all. That's when I knew. This was over. The following Monday, 8 days after I'd walked out, I began closing the chapter. I canceled shared plans. I removed myself from everything we'd committed to together. I changed my relationship status online and let my family know that Lydia and I were done. My sister, Vanessa, was supportive. She wasn't shocked. She'd met Lydia a few times, thought she was nice enough, but she also knew how often I'd vented about Danny. She told me she was proud of me for finally standing up for myself, for not staying in a situation where I was constantly brushed aside. That night, Lydia messaged again. She asked if I'd really ended everything over just a friendship. Her tone was full of disbelief, like she couldn't fathom that I had actually walked away. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I'd been more than clear. There was nothing left to clarify. Over the next few days, more messages followed. At first, she was furious. She called the entire thing ridiculous, saying I was throwing away something good over my own jealousy. She insisted we could fix it if I would just calm down. She called me unreasonable. Then came the bargaining. She said she'd reduce contact with Danny, maybe only say hello at the gym, no more private conversations. She asked if we could meet in person, talk it out face to face. But I didn't respond. That opportunity had passed a long time ago, back when I first tried to express how uncomfortable their connection made me. It had passed again on that Saturday, when she wasted 5 full minutes scrolling on her phone instead of choosing me. By the third week, her messages started to carry a different tone. They were softer, more emotional. She said maybe she'd handled things badly. She offered to cut Danny off completely if that's what it took. She told me she finally realized what she had to lose, how much I had meant to her, and that she'd do anything to fix what had gone wrong. But by then it was too late, because the core problem was never really Danny. He wasn't the issue, not entirely. The real problem was the lack of respect, the way my voice never seemed to carry weight, the way my emotions were treated like background noise rather than something worth listening to. Again and again, Lydia had shown me where I ranked. She made it clear. Her connection with Danny took priority over my comfort. My boundaries were optional. My feelings were just another obstacle to work around, not something to be honored. Almost a month after I left, she sent her final message. She said she finally understood why I'd been upset. She apologized for invalidating my feelings and admitted the whole ordeal had been eye-opening. She said she'd learned a lot about herself, about relationships, and hoped we could have a fresh start. I read the message. I stared at it for maybe half a minute, and then I deleted it. No reply, no second thought, because in hindsight, I can say this with absolute clarity. The day Danny showed up at her apartment wasn't the end of us. It was the beginning of my freedom. That moment shattered any lingering illusion I had about where I stood in Lydia's world. It cut through all the denial I'd been clinging to and finally forced me to face the truth I didn't want to admit. What I learned that day was simple, but powerful. Boundaries aren't suggestions, they're declarations. And when someone constantly brushes off your concerns, they're quietly revealing how little regard they have for you and for the relationship itself. In the end, I understood that sometimes walking away isn't cold. It's the kindest thing you can do for yourself. More than anything, I proved to myself that I had the backbone to stay true to my word, even when it hurt like hell. When I gave Lydia 5 minutes to decide, I wasn't issuing an empty threat. And when I said she wouldn't see me again if she didn't make that call, I wasn't playing games. I meant it, fully, completely. There are people who would say I was being too harsh, that I was trying to control her or reacting out of insecurity. Some would argue I should have been more tolerant of her friendship with Danny. But I lived every second of that experience. I know what it felt like from the inside. I know what I endured. And I know the exact moment I decided I was done accepting less than what I deserved. That day, I showed Lydia that my limits were real, and that I respected myself enough to enforce them. Even more importantly, I showed myself that I had the strength to follow through, even with the woman I loved standing there, asking me not to. Now, 6 months later, I've started letting new people into my life. I'm cautiously exploring what might come next. And still, sometimes, I wonder how things might have played out. If only she'd picked up the phone. If she had chosen me instead of defending her attachment to Danny. If she'd realized that love sometimes means choosing your partner over your pride, over your habits, over your comfort. But then I remember how it felt to have my emotions dismissed for so long. To witness someone I cared about continually place another man's company above my peace of mind. To be made to feel irrational for simply asking to be respected. And those memories quickly clear up any doubts I still carry. The truth is, Lydia showed me exactly who she was, and what life by her side would always look like. She made it clear that my pain couldn't compete with her need for companionship, that my boundaries would always come second to her desire to keep certain people in her orbit, that my voice, my feelings, my values, none of them held much weight if they conflicted with what she wanted. And for that clarity, I'm deeply grateful. Before rings, before shared property, before children. Looking back, I'm oddly thankful that Danny showed up at her place that day. His presence cracked open a conversation we'd been dodging for too long. But even more than that, I'm grateful I had the clarity and courage to walk away from a dynamic where I was no longer respected, heard, or appreciated. It was the hardest decision I'd made in years, but also the most important one. Sometimes loving someone means standing beside them through fire, but other times, it means recognizing when they've stopped showing up for you and loving yourself enough to stop showing up for them. That Saturday, I gave Lydia a choice. I asked her to end whatever it was she had with Danny. She responded with a laugh, just like she had every other time I brought it up. But that night, I did the one thing she never expected. I didn't fold. I stood my ground. I honored my dignity by stepping away from a relationship that had stopped feeding my soul. In just 5 minutes, everything changed. 5 minutes to stop being invisible. 5 minutes to take my power back. 5 minutes to live the words I spoke without compromise. And that, my friend, is where the story ends. I'd love to hear your reflections. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for taking the time to be here. If this spoke to something in you, I invite you to explore the other videos on the channel. Until we meet again, take good care.